I'm Susan Cheek from Virginia State University's Small Farm Outreach Program, and we're glad to welcome Rob Davis from Prince George, Virginia. He's a beginning beekeeper, going to talk to you about your first year of beekeeping and what you need to do to make it happen. I'll turn it over to Rob now.
Good morning. I'm Rob Davis. I'm the owner-operator of Heavenly Hideaway Farms, and this is our second year of beekeeping going into our third. I am by no means an expert or even close to knowledgeable. We're learning how much we don't know every day, but just wanted to, was asked to pass along and share what we've gone through over our first full year of beekeeping. And we have a video kind of at the end that summarizes everything and replicates the farm visit that would have normally happened. Next slide. And then, just so you know, we're open to questions during or also at the end. And I know a lot of you are in various stages of beekeeping, but just wanted to kind of hit the basics. A bunch of this is from information that I attended in our beekeeping club. They hosted a 2-weekend beekeeping course. If anybody has a chance, I highly recommend it. The one thing I can say is I definitely have noticed a difference between friends of mine who are doing self-learn through the internet versus those that went to a bee club and did a beekeeping class. The biggest thing is some of the classes you get some hand-on experience and you get to meet beekeeping mentors and you dial into them quite often, especially for your first couple years. Also, a great source of information is Facebook. The Virginia Beekeepers Association is a great place, and there's some local, your bee club might have a Facebook page or your region. But what I present to you is what we were kind of taught and what we've used, and we've done pretty well. But at the same time, you'll find that more than anything around the farm, in beekeeping, everyone has an opinion, and everyone's right. It just depends on your circumstances, your conditions, and what works for you. And if you have questions, reach out to your extension agent, another local beekeeper, reach out on Facebook, or better yet, if you have a bee mentor, they're always great because then they help talk you off the edge sometimes. Real quick for the beekeeping year, we'll go through the year, associated tasks. We'll go through some beekeeping equipment basics, also integrated pest management to include mite checks. There's a quick video of us doing a mite check towards the end, and there's a couple different techniques. We were taught all three, but encouraged, or it was recommended to do one because they had a higher success rate is what our bee mentor liked, but other mentors like different methods. So in the beginning, just to kind of start from a point, I figured the best thing is just to basically go over what is a beehive and the components. So basically for your components, you've got your hive stand, looking at the picture on the right. Starting at the bottom, you have your bottom board. Then you've got your supers, and supers are where your brood or your colony is living. The queen is laying, and a whole bunch of other stuff that will go on a little bit. Then you have a queen extruder, which some people will discuss later, like it. Some people don't use it. Again, that's where we get into what works best for you. And what the people around you are finding successful or not successful. But a queen extruder is basically almost like a little wire grate with a specific spacing between. The queen can't go through it to lay, but the workers can. And so then above it is your supers. That's where your honey's made, that you can do your harvest. It's also in your brood boxes too. Then you have your inner cover and outer cover. And that's the basic components of a hive. And there's all sorts of thoughts on the mixes, the sizes. I briefly talked about it later on. Next slide. So for the beekeeping year, the biggest thing is that it's different than the calendar year, but it all depends and fluctuates every year based on the weather, what's around you. If you're in a rural area, the farms or the fields around you. If you're in a rural, in a neighborhood, then the activities, what people are planning, stuff like that. This year, this spring, it came really early. So everything was kind of really off cycle compared to the year before, which was more for us. You could almost read a book, um, and by month the things were going on. This year it was anything but that. And we'll kind of go over periods of time and what the tasks are for those months, and they grouped in 2-3 months at a time. And then the biggest thing is the beekeeper learning curve. So right now, hopefully, we're not going into the winter of despair. But we did have a summer success, but we did have waves of some issues. So we were hitting the summer of despair here and there. And now um, the light came on a bunch of stuff. And I think next year we're going to get into the spring of understanding and get after it. The good news is so far, we've maintained our 3 original hives from 2 years ago, and we went up to 5 this year by doing a successful split and catching a swarm. Next slide. On this one, um, like I already mentioned, the beekeeping year and the calendar year is different. So the bees enter their fall in August. So as you're wrapping things up in the garden or in the fields and getting ready to do a harvest or whatever, and still think you've got a month to go for the vegetation, the bees have to start getting prepped in August for the fall. That's when their fall cycle starts. And why that's so important is if you get the conditions right in your hive and you get the bees as healthy as you can going into winter, then you have a higher success rate of them overwintering and then coming out in the spring in good shape and not having to rebuild that hive or reestablish a hive or purchase. So in the heat of the August, it's kind of hard to believe, but the big thing is you've got to be thinking, even though it's really hot, you got to be thinking prep those bees for the cold. And the biggest thing to start in August is mite checks. And we'll get that into a little bit. Next slide, please. And then this is kind of where we talk about the blocks of time for the bee calendar and kind of the tasks and what's going on with the bees and then what the beekeeper should be doing. A couple of the reference stuff that I had from class and was double checking online to make sure I was current. Some of the months ahead, beekeepers take vacation or relax. I don't think that ever happens. There's just less stuff you're doing within the hive, but that doesn't mean you're not doing a whole bunch outside the hives, getting ready for the spring. So in August, the colony is starting to diminish in its size. You'll see people talking about drones starting to get kicked out. You'll see wasps increase. Hopefully you're coming out of what they call the dearth. And the dearth is basically when a lot of your pollen sources have dried up through the heat of the summer. If you set things right, and it's kind of at the end with your forage, you've got something always in bloom for the bees. throughout the growing season. But the nectar flow stops. So you just start watching and managing as you're starting to go into the cool down periods. You also have to look at shrinking down your boxes. Um, and we'll get in that in a minute. And then the good thing for the beekeeper is there's less chance of swarming, but it can still happen. I know last year at this time, um, I was hearing a lot about late season swarms, which was catching people off guard. Also, to start doing mite checks. So we've got a short video on it later, and then we talk about it in pest management. But starting to get into mite checks in August is critical because then that gives you time to get, if you do have a moderate to high level of mites, then you can take measures to get that number really low, as close to zero as possible before you winter. Because the mites impact the health of the hive, which impact your layings, your patterns, if they overwinter well, all that kind of stuff. And I was taught that, you know, um, you will have mites at one time, no matter what you do. So it's just how you manage it. In September, and I know some people out there don't have mites. And last year we didn't. This year I was expecting the same, but our mite numbers were up a little. Still not crazy, but you know, I was hoping for zero. And when I didn't have it, I was kind of surprised. Um, September, the bees, the drones are still kind of getting kicked out. You'll see less drone cells and everything like that. And all of a sudden you start watching the egg production and the cat brood starting to decrease. Um, what we were taught was September 27th by my bee mentor in the bee club that we went through their class was their magic date for our area in Virginia. And it's different for everybody based on your climate and stuff. But here in our region, September 27th was about the last laying mark that they put on the calendar, brood cycle to get you ready for winter. So they said those were your winter bees. If you've got honey supers on there, now's the time to take them off. It's recommended that you keep about 60 pounds of honey on there for winter. When you get really cold winters, they'll consume more. Um, you, it's just part of management. Also, you know, if it's warmer, you never know. You might be feeding less. I'm kind of surprised the last couple of weeks how much you're bringing in and not pulling off the feeder. And we actually had to feed a little this year because some of our cover crops, with all the rain, didn't do well. Or they did okay, but they didn't bloom like in the volume we were expecting. Um, and then the other thing in September is to check for the queen's presence. Um, and the medicate is if you do find mites. There's lots of different medication methods. We'll talk about just a few general principles when we get to that part. But there takes a time for some of that medication to take hold. And based on the weather in your area, um, there's different mite treatments based on temperature and everything. So it's all specific to your region. If it's really hot, there's some stuff you can't use. If it's really cold, you know, other stuff's recommended. Next slide. And then October, November, things are really kind of slowing down quite a bit. Um, you're really starting to watch your cold weather. We were taught anything below 50 degrees, do not crack the hives. And when you get periods that are above 50 and not cloudy or windy, you get into the hive real quick. You're just doing maintenance tasks you didn't finish up, doing quick checks, maybe taking out some of your mite treatment applications and check on their feeding. And then November, things really kind of slow down. You're watching where your cluster is, make sure they have a good tight ball. And before the first frost, you put in what they call mouse guards. It's basically 1/2 inch metal screen is what I was taught. It just keeps the mice out of the entrance. You can buy a bunch of mice guards online. There's 1,000 different techniques. Also, at certain temperature points, then we were taught to come off of your syrup. We've gone from a 1-to-1, which is your 8 pounds of sugar to 1 gallon of water, to 2-to-1, which is 16 pounds of sugar to 1 gallon of water. But then when you start dropping below 50, especially when your nights start getting cold, that's when people start putting on some solid foods. And there's all different choices out there. The biggest thing too is don't overfeed. They might be taking it in, but when you're doing your inspections, you're making sure the queen's got space to lay. Last year, we actually swarmed a colony in the summer. We didn't know, we were taught feed, 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 and we did, and they kept taking it. We did not know that we'd locked up the hive with syrup. So we actually caused a swarm in one of the hives because there was no place for the queen to lay. So that was a lesson learned. Next slide. In December and January, we were taught don't get into it, the hives. When there are those brief warm windows, 50 degrees or above, that's when I'll get into the hive real quick and I'll put on solid food or check their stuff. Most of the time, just cracking the top cover if you're running sugar boards, or we were actually running some solid feeder patties. That was a combination of fondant, um, vitamins for the bees, pollen supplements, all that, and lay it on the boxes real quick and closing it. We weren't pulling frames or doing inspections or anything. It was just a quick get in there, feed, make sure we didn't have hive beetles or moths or anything that popped up out of nowhere, no mice, and we were done. It was about 5 minutes per hive or less. So we're moving pretty quick. And in January is really when we kind of started watching what we were up to. Sometimes you can't get in there for weeks. The great thing is it gives you time to go to the bee clubs, also gives you time to go to the classes. A lot of the beginner beekeeping and then advanced beekeeping courses are offered in January, February, March, just depends on where you live. And also, if you're getting newbies, then you're starting to put in your order for bee packages or bee nukes. Next slide. And then they call it the awakening, but February and March, things are starting to warm up. February, if it starts getting warm towards the end of the month, then the queen will start laying, the workers will start going, but as soon as you start getting that warmer weather, then the bees are starting to get out and about and starting to do their forage, and they're starting to consume their stores quite a bit as all the production and activity in that hive starts up. If you do get in late February, early March, and it's still chilly, you just got to watch that you don't expose the hives when you open it up to do a quick inspection or get into an early pest management treatment. We did this February. We put in some treatment for mites, even though we didn't have any. They said it's better to do a quick treatment to make sure they're really healthy and strong going into spring. But you literally are going in there and moving pretty quick through your hives. And that's when you start transitioning from your solid foods to your liquids, your syrups and stuff like that. This year, we actually were, I think, 2 months ahead because we had such a mild winter. And in March, we were waiting for a surge, but thinking it was in April, and it was in March. And when it happens, you've got to have all your stuff ready because it moves pretty quick, and you've got to have stuff ready to put on in time for them to expand. Next. And then for busting out, you've got that's April, May, the typical, textbook spring, but that's when all the things are blooming. Uh, the queen's laying really strong, um, and that's what you're checking on your uh, inspections and everything. You're making sure her pattern's good. They're taking in the pollen and the nectar, and you're really starting to watch for swarms and swarm cells. We don't have a picture of that or in the video. You can look online or in your reference material or talk to your bee club, but there's basically 3 types of queen cells, and they mean different things, but they're building so quick that you have got to keep bee space in there for them to produce and lay eggs and everything else, but they'll swarm in a heartbeat on you. Or if you get a couple days of rain and then a surge of warm weather, um, you'll get a swarm sometimes. That's what we experienced around here. Next slide. And then in the summer, you're still watching for your swarms. You're watching for the queen's pattern and laying rate. You're making sure your hives are healthy. That you're checking for your like I said, swarms. You can't emphasize that one enough because you could have a super strong colony, but if all of a sudden you run out of space and they swarm, you've just lost a really good laying queen, and it could set you back 45 days, because then the bees go from collecting and doing all the honey and raising the brood to more of a colony survival, and you're checking to make sure a swarm cell's in there and capped, and then you start your clock, and you're watching your bee cycle. And we've had the one last year that we lost, that we overfed and it swarmed. We actually let it run its full cycle with my wife's coaching on patience, and that was the best laying queen we've had. And she's done really well, but I've learned patience. Practicing it is a different thing sometimes, um, but it comes with time. And then we're texting with other beekeepers in the area that I've met, just comparing notes and making sure that, when you run into some decisions, are you making the right choice? What are their thoughts? That kind of stuff. Next slide. So that was kind of it for the time periods. And I know we're moving kind of quick, but I know there'll probably be a bunch of questions that are at the end. And there's about an 11-minute video, and then a couple other ones with some harvesting and stuff like that. But right now, as you're starting to get everything for winter, you're starting to get an idea of what equipment you need. We actually got some equipment. We bought a bee trailer from a beekeeper that was retiring after 20, 30 years. It was a mobile processing plant. That's really what we thought was the best value. You couldn't beat the price, and a bunch of his old hives without the bees came with it. When we started doing a closer look and cleaning everything out, we realized that half that equipment was either a different size or in poor condition. So that had to put us into a cycle of ordering some new equipment. So it gets into, this is why is the whole rush. In the beginning of your first or second year, you're still learning the tips and tricks. When we first got the hives, it took us about a week to do 10 frames and 1 box, and that was just assembly. Now we can probably do about 10 boxes and 100 frames in half a day, but we've moved on from hand nailing and everything to pulling out the old pneumatic staple and nail guns and stuff like that, and learning you don't need to glue every joint, stuff like that. But as you see, it takes up to 5 to 10 weeks from the time you decide what you want, order, it comes in, assemble, it, you paint it, and then it has to cure. So it takes a little while. And then for the bee tools, what's recommended, at least the basics, is the hive tool to open hives. And there's lots of them out there. Depends on your experience, what you like to use, what your bee mentor recommends. Um, but that's one of those critical basic pieces. Even if you're going in the middle of winter for a quick inspection, you usually always have your hive tool with you. Then you've got smoker, which is one of the other important ones, bee brush, and a decapping tool, which is for harvesting honey. And then optional is a frame grip or a frame holder. Uh, Frame holder is kind of an external thing that you hang on the side of the hive, and when you pull the frame out to do an inspection, you can kind of hang it there. The club we went to was pretty phenomenal. They recommended, though, not to use that because you never know if you've missed a queen or where she is. So their thought was if you put it on a hanger, she could drop onto the ground, and then all of a sudden you've lost a queen. So you'll see in the video where we actually were taught to put our frames in a nuke box that we got with our original hives. And that's what we keep, and it keeps everything kind of safe. Next slide. And then for all the woodenware and stuff, that's just basically the hive components. The big thing is, and we talk about it in the video a little, but there's a couple different thoughts, and here's where you go into different beekeepers, tons of opinions, different thoughts, different schools, but it basically what works for you and your region. But you've got shallows or smalls, mediums, and deeps. Your length of your frames are all the same, but it's how tall or how big they are. The biggest thing, and why we've got it highlighted in yellow, is those different sizes are not interchangeable. So you'll see us mention it in the video, whereas we're trying to do some hive maintenance and inspection stuff. But if you're trying to switch out or some equipment between hives, or you're trying to condense or consolidate, uh, do splits, all those different things, and you've got all sorts of different size equipment, you run into issues that it's not interchangeable. What was recommended to us that we've done is we run all the same size. We're running 8-frame mediums, and the reason why they recommended it was as you get a little older, those honey supers, if you're having a really good year, get very heavy. So 8-frame medium is a lot easier to manage by yourself or with somebody else than 10-frame deeps. But I know some people in traditionally run deeps only. It's just what works for you. And then kind of, it's the same equipment. It just depends where you put it, is what the bottom section is, the brood box and the honey super. It's the basic thing. But if you've got it above the excluder or to the point where they're not laying eggs in it and you're harvesting your honey, that's a honey super. Where the colony lives and the queen's laying, that's your brood box. But it literally looks the same. It's just depends on its function. Next slide. And then predators, my favorite. But so we've kind of already talked about mice real quick, and you can see that one picture with the wire, and that's just entrance guard for mice that you can fabricate yourself. You can also buy them through any of the suppliers. There's lots of different options. Some are pretty cool. But what you're doing is, as it gets colder, the mice like warm, and so you're just keeping them out of the hive. The other predators are skunk, possum, raccoon, and bear. For the skunk, possum, and raccoons, what was recommended to us, but I know there's a million different techniques. we raised our hives on a stand, and you can kind of see in that picture below the hives. That's what we did. We went with 18 inches. We weren't doing as much bending over, and it gave us enough height off the ground that we weren't too worried. Um, and I'll come back to that one in a second, but that does not always stop them from getting in. But the basic premise is if they don't like to stand up, because I guess it's instinctual that they know they'll get um, stung as a defense mechanism. And then last is bear. I know here in Virginia, we had quite a few bears with the very warm and mild winter and early spring start to do some movement. I was actually watching it on some of the regional Facebook beekeeping stuff and saw one was in our county. I'm like, oh, that's on the other side of the county. We're good. Um, you know, and did a private message and just checked where they lived just so I could at least be aware. Meanwhile, in our neighborhood or our part of the county, and we're kind of rural, there hasn't been a bear for over 30 years or more that any of the farmers can remember. And it was about a week after the one lady said she saw a bear that I was coming down with the tractor, and I saw a big black thing in the middle of our field. And I'm like, oh, the neighbor's dog's out. And it took about a second and realized it was a black bear. And I'm like, well, this is interesting. And of course, your first thoughts break out the camera, um, so you have proof in your story to both your family and friends. But I actually kind of froze up watching the bear's pattern. I couldn't tell it was headed towards the hive direction, but there's some big field maintenance around here with surrounding farms. So I don't know if it was going through a choke point or it was going to the hive. It really didn't matter. Um, but it actually kind of stood there, and the field it was in actually had an electric fence around it. And so I know it got hit going in because when I spooked it, it was definitely making a decision on which way was less painful getting zapped on the way out. So we didn't see any bears, but we did not have an electric fence up around the hives. I never thought we needed it. Needless to say, we were supposed to go get some ice cream that afternoon as a family. I got put on hold for a couple hours, called the warden, and we pulled up the Virginia, um, the DGIF, the Virginia Game Warden page. Sorry, the technical term slipped on my thing, but the link is there that you can copy, but it gives you instructions on how to construct a bear fence. We do ours with the solar electric fence, and it's worked great. The difference between that and a traditional livestock, you're just alternating some spacing of your wire and your hot and ground wires. So that's kind of what we've learned, and we're finding as the farm does better and grows, or we increase our activity, so does nature. So it's kind of finding that happy balance. Next. And then something that you're always struggling with and hope not to be in a happy balance, because for you, the beekeeper, happy balance is 0 for mites or pests, but is the integrated pest management. So what we were taught with where we went was that you do as little pest management as you can, because the mites grow accustomed to a treatment. So if you have a preferred treatment and you use it year after year, the mites will actually get not immune, but not affected like they should by your treatment. So if you always use a certain product, they actually get accustomed to it and can withstand it. So it's keeping using the least harsh stuff you can. We always are running mite boards on with oil pans underneath to do the high beetles and mites. We're running, and it's in the video, some beetle traps with oil in there. And for the first time this year, we added a box thinking that the hive was going to expand, and all of a sudden we hit the dearth and they didn't. And it's the first time we had hive moths. Luckily, we caught it within probably 4 days of putting the super on. So we pulled it back off and got rid of the foundation and got rid of the moths. Um, but kind of, I don't get into specifics because uh, there's so much out there, and this is a whole topic. And actually, there's been some pretty great seminars um, at VSU through the Small Farmer Outreach Program that's gone through pest management. And you can go on about this for a whole week, but this is just kind of the concepts. It's just keeping it environmentally friendly. There's definitely some things that you can't add legally if you're selling your honey while your honey supers are on. So you just have to be careful to watch your precautions and times applications and everything. And you've also got to record what you put on and when you put it on and how long you left it on. There's also great apps out there too. It's also part of some of the registration stuff in our state. We do the mite check. So we at least can share our information with our hives, with others in the area, so everyone can monitor how they're doing and if there's a issue in our area that, needs to be addressed. Next slide. And then this is kind of the big categories within the pest management, but the cultural, which is mostly well, there's a bunch out there, but the biggest thing that's talked about with my limited experiences running queens or that are resistant, or I know Russian queens are said to actually fight the mites and produce offspring that keep mites in check. Um, but I know there's lots of research and everything out there, and I won't go on that because I'm not too well versed on a lot of it. I know there's a lot of experts out there. Um, Modify the environment. Some people recommend putting powdered sugar on and sprinkle it in your hives, and it pushes the mites off. Use screen bottom boards, which is what we do, is one of them. And then there's also trap and remove the mites in drone foundation. So mites like to lay in your eggs, and they say that if you can put the drone frames in there and the queen lays nothing but drones, it's almost like fly paper, and hopefully that's where most of your mites are at. And then you can pull it out and discard the frame and freeze it, or whatever you want, but definitely not put it back in. Then there's other biological stuff. It's all experimental. um, and I haven't heard or used it much. And then the other thing is, what you see quite a bit is the chemicals. And there's the less toxic, more natural kind of stuff, and then there's the more toxic. And I've watched some people lately on some of the posts where they put in some of the more toxic stuff. Um, it didn't say whether their mite count was high or low, but it actually had some pretty interesting effects that they weren't expecting on the hive. Some good, some bad, but it's just something to be aware of. No matter what you do, it goes back to that. For every action, there's an equal reaction. It's the same with the treatment. It's just what works best for you in your area with your conditions to help the mites. Next slide. And last, but this could be a whole nother month-long topic in multiple classes, but the biggest thing is your floral sources. So where are your your bees foraging, and how do you manage it? How do you have enough of something within bloom through the whole cycle? And they do travel up to about a 3-mile radius from the hives, so there's quite a bit out there. We live in farmland, so there's some stuff out there. We run cover crop and some other things to help with the bees forage. We also this year discovered we had more tulip poplars than we ever knew of in the spring. So it's kind of neat as we're in our, beginning to pay attention to more with our beekeeping. You actually are starting to notice more of their sources. And then um, our kids were fishing at the farm pond right by the house yesterday and actually saw the honeybees on the flowers of the water lilies. Who would have known? So it's just kind of interesting. There's articles and stuff out there with the USDA on what the best pollen and nectar sources are. Some are balanced between pollen and nectar, some plants, some are better nectar, some are better pollen. So it's just what works best in your area and what you want to do. The goal is to have something blooming. We actually had buckwheat this year. Last year we had it too, but when we did a replant on the second cycle in our areas, when we went into a drought, and then it's been some crazy amounts of rain ever since, and that second planting never came up. Or bloomed. So we actually ran into a dearth where we didn't the year before. So we're in the spring of discovery next year. And now I'm going to run a whole bunch of different varieties. So I've got something for the bees to forage the whole time. And hopefully I'm learning. And then I'll get a lot more honey than I do with a single source. And I think that's it for the slide. If we could go to the video, Mark.
So on the hive, not to insult anybody's intelligence, but for those that are starting, you've got your bottom board. Then where the bees are laying eggs, you got your brood boxes. And the brood boxes are where they're laying their eggs and their colonies thriving. And then you put in a screen. Some people do and some people don't, but it's called a clean excluder. And the worker bees can go through it, but the queen can't actually fit through the grade. And then you then you run honey above it. What we're trying this year, I'll grab it real quick. So it's a bottom board edition, and so it's vented. These kind of line up with the frames, and these go on the very bottom. So that's what you see right here. And it supposedly gives the bees more space, less likely to swarm, and more ventilation. And then this is kind of new, and it's a top inner cover. It's screened, the bees can't get through it, but it also is for ventilation. Because when it gets very hot, the bees do what you call beard, and they are on the front of the hive, and they're in a big cluster fanning their wings. They're keeping the hive cooler. So what they taught us in our beekeeping thing, oh dude, this looks good, is that you never know where the queen is. So you don't want to hang the queen out there and lose her on the ground by dropping her. So we were taught to take your top cover, flip it upside down so it gives you a base. This is the summer cover we put on last week, 2 weeks ago, and it seems to be working really well. And then this small shim is called the upper hive entrance. It gives you a little space, and it's also where the bees can come in the upper entrance up here. So we're gonna go ahead and pull our first frame, and we've learned not to work your hive tool. There's 100 different hive tools. It's whatever hive tool you like. So what you want to see is it's almost like a half moon. So when the bees are laying, they almost form like a baseball. So it's like or a basketball. And so you'll see on the very outer edges of your frames, honey, and then drone, which is the male. It's kind of raised, capped brood. And then you should see almost solid sheets of flat brood, capped. which is all your female workers. So they actually look really good. And they were laying in the box number 3. So that colony was our worst last year that we were worried about. And now it's actually one of the better ones is coming back up. Using the smoker is mainly keeps them calmer and mask their smell, and it'll push the bees down into the hive, so you won't have them all coming up in your face, but it also allows for the inspection to go a little quicker. So last year it took us like 3 hours, an hour per hive to go through everything because we were looking for the queen and all sorts of stuff. This year we can actually do all 6 in about an hour. And when you do the inspection, you always have the frames in the same, go back in the same sequence and in the same direction, because the bees, believe it or not, know it. And take a good look, because that one looks like it's got nectar in it. This whole front, you can take that over to them. That whole front is loaded honey, that one side. That's what we're hoping for. So this one, what we're looking for is, you can see this cap here. I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but this one is a bubble where the other ones aren't. That one's a drone comb. You've also got like a little white dot there with that little almost enclosed, that's yet to be capped. That's an older larva in its later stages. And you can see what we're talking about, the brood, where it almost makes that ball, that crescent, where their brood was. And you've got capped honey, the food on the outside. Then this was the outside frame, so we expect to see some drone there. And then usually when we're in the hive, then we flip it upside down and look. And we see, I'm looking for, in the sun, larva and nectar. And I don't know if you can see it, but it's actually glistening. It almost looks like little white worms or milk. That's baby larva. Now what we're watching for, the queen cells, these bottom, they naturally do it, but we want to make sure is we don't have any with larvae in it, because if we do, then that means they're going to swarm, and we've got to go into a deeper inspection on our hives to figure out why we're going to swarm. And what we do is we smoke every time you're about to open a box, just because it pushes them down and keeps them in check. What we were taught is you pull one frame out, we put ours in the nuke box, so in case the queen's on it, she doesn't fall out. I see lots of larvae and, okay, and I see lots of pollen. So this hive is actually doing really well. Also, while we're doing this, the other thing is, we've got our hives off the ground, and you notice we did ours at 18 inches. I think they said 15 to 18 inches off the ground sometimes is recommended, because that's the height of the predators will not go for the bees, like skunks, possums, raccoons, stuff like that. Bears are another story. But it's the height that the skunks will not, or the possums won't get up on their hind legs to get into the hives for fear of getting stung. We added a mite trap, a beetle trap, and it's just simply a holder. It's black on top, the beetles can fall through, but the bees don't. And then you put it in between 2 frames on your top box. And then the beetles, when they crawl across, will fall in. We had great success with it last year. We didn't have horrible beetle problem, but we think it kept it in check. But that's just a old dish soap bottle. We filled it with vegetable oil because then we can pour it down here really easy without spilling a gallon of oil into the hive and not the trap. that's a medium, and then this is a deep. You can see the difference. What we were taught is keep all your hive components the same size. And they recommended running medium 8 frames because as your stack gets taller, that's a lot of weight. It's over 120 pounds for a deep when you're doing honey, and that's a lot to pull over your head when you're actually doing good with all the hives. The medium 8 frames will hold you around 80 pounds, so it's a lot more manageable. And we actually found it worked pretty good. But the other big thing besides the weight is, for whatever reason, when you're doing hive maintenance, sometimes, like in the spring or last year, we swap parts. So if we've got a hive that's weak, we'll brush the bees off, but you've got the brood, the cap larva, and we'll actually move a full frame to another hive, so it increases their number over time. But if you've got all different sizes, shapes, you name it, you can't switch your frames like that, so it kind of limits you. The thing is, the more empty space you have in the hive, the more the bees got to defend and try to work. So we went kind of off script, off plan, but we just shrunk the hive, replaced the box. We've added that bottom summer board for ventilation, and we've still got a queen. She's still laying. It's not the best shape. Oh yeah, it's not the best shape, but we are going to, oh wait, dude, here's purple. But we're gonna feed it and let them build up. So today I was with my son Alexander. Our intent was to check on the hives. We wanted to see if we had all the queens, if any were in threat of swarming, what their food level was, whether they were bringing back enough nectar and pollen, or if we had to go and do some supplemental feeding. And also we did some hive maintenance. So we had a couple that were 10 frame deeps, and we're running pretty much 8 frame medium stuff. So we were consolidating some old hive equipment we got from a retired beekeeper and updating it to newer stuff. So what we saw today was we've got 6 queens. They're all laying good. We've got one hive that was strong that's a little weaker right now. So we'll have to watch that one kind of close. And we saw that our new hive that we did from a split a month ago is doing really well, and the queen's laying. That was kind of basically what we did. We were hoping to pull honey today, but we didn't have enough to pull to make it worth pulling. But we had a couple nice frames. So we're hoping, maybe next week.
And then this is just a short video of honey harvesting and extraction that we were going to show. We'd like to credit this farmer, Macomb Bees Apiaries. This just shows you how to extract the honey.
The bees fan the honey, bring the moisture content from 85% to 18%. In order to keep the honey from rehydrating, lay wax capping over the cell to still the honey. In order to extract the honey, cappings must first be removed. Once the cappings are removed, both sides of the frame can be loaded into the thread. By spinning the frame, the centrifugal force pulls the honey from the cells. The honey is thrown to the inside of the drum, where it will gradually run down to the bottom of the tank. Once at the bottom of the tank, the honey runs through 2 filters. One is a 600 micron and one is a 400 micron filter. honey and the cappings will also drain into a stream at the bottom of the tank. This honey also goes through additional filters before ending up in the yellow bucket. The bees fan the honey to bring the moisture content.
Okay. So that was the end of that presentation.
Okay, Mark, and I think those were the two videos in the end of the slide. So, Susan?
So we're just going to give a few minutes. If anybody has any questions, post them on Facebook so we can let Rob know what your questions are.
That was actually a pretty nice frame of honey that I wish I had in that TikTok video.
I don't know where they're located. I
I
don't
don't
know.
know, but that was like a picture perfect frame of capped honey.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, I'm not seeing any questions. Do you guys want to give them a couple minutes?
Sure.
Yeah, I can give them a few minutes.
Because this afternoon, actually, we're going to go back into the hives and do a quick inspection. It'll be our first nice day in between these bouts of rainy weather days.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that about wraps it up. If you guys have any questions, feel free to share on Facebook. The video will be available on YouTube and Facebook for future. And just like to thank Rob for coming on and doing this presentation this morning.
Thank you guys for having me, and thanks for all the help from VSU Small Farmer Outreach Program. I couldn't have done any of this without them. And it's been a tremendous help with education and everything else along the whole way.